At the darkest hour of the night, a poor young man stood in his father's doorway with shaking hands and burning eyes, uttering words that would haunt them both forever, not because they were cruel, but because they were born from a love so desperate it had lost all sense of reason. He was a boy with nothing to lose and everything to prove, trapped between poverty and an impossible dream, the desire to marry a princess who lived behind golden palace walls. That single moment marked the beginning of a journey where love would be tested, pride would be broken, and destiny itself would be forced to listen. The young man's name was Arjun, and he was the only son of a weary woodcutter whose life had been shaped by struggle and silence. Their home was small, built from worn timber and fading hope, but it was filled with honesty and hard work. Arjun had grown up watching his father bow his head before fate, accepting poverty as if it were a law of nature. Yet Arjun was different. He believed destiny was meant to be challenged, not obeyed. And that belief had slowly turned into a dangerous obsession when his heart chose Princess Eliza, someone the world insisted he could never have. Arjun had seen Princess Eliza only once, during a royal procession that passed briefly through the village. She sat high upon a white horse, surrounded by guards and silk banners, her face calm yet distant, like a dream meant to be forgotten by ordinary people. But Arjun did not forget. From that single moment, her image settled into his mind and slowly took control of his thoughts. Day after day, as he chopped wood beside his father, his hands worked, but his heart wandered beyond the forests, beyond poverty, and into the palace he had never entered. He convinced himself that love did not recognize class or crowns, that if his feelings were true, the world would eventually have to accept them. What he did not realize was that belief without wisdom can become a storm, one that threatens to destroy everything in its path. That belief finally exploded one cold evening when Arjun could no longer keep his feelings locked inside his chest. As the fire crackled in their small home, he turned to his father and spoke of the princess as if she were already his destiny. The old man listened in silence, his weathered face growing heavier with every word. When Arjun demanded that his father go to the palace and ask the king for Princess Eliza's hand, the room filled with fear. The father tried to reason with him, explaining the cruelty of the world, the distance between the poor and the powerful. But Arjun's voice hardened and desperation took control. He declared that if his father refused, he would walk away from his home, his family, and his future, choosing ruin over surrender. In that moment, love stopped sounding like hope and began to sound like a threat. The words struck Arjun's father harder than any physical blow ever could. He saw not a strong young man, but a child standing at the edge of destruction, blinded by pride and longing. Fear crept into his heart, not fear of the king, but fear of losing his only son. That night, the old man did not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside, wondering where he had failed as a father. By morning, his decision was made, not out of hope, but out of love. If walking into humiliation was the price to save his son from ruin, he would pay it without complaint. At sunrise, Arjun's father began the long walk toward the capital, each step heavier than the last. The road was lined with stone houses that grew grander as he moved forward, a cruel reminder of how small his own life had always been. By the time he reached the palace gates, his hands were shaking and his clothes were dust-stained. Unworthy of the marble steps before him, guards eyed him with suspicion. Nobles whispered behind silk sleeves, and laughter floated through the air like poison. Yet the old man stood firm, swallowing his shame, because a father's love is sometimes stronger than dignity. After hours of waiting beneath the burning sun, the father was finally summoned inside the palace. The hall was vast and cold, its walls decorated with victories that had never included men like him. At the far end sat King Rowan, calm and unreadable, his crown resting lightly upon his head. When the old man spoke, his voice trembled but did not break as he explained why he had come. A murmur of amusement swept through the court, and several nobles smiled in disbelief. The king raised a hand for silence, studying the poor father with quiet intensity, as if trying to understand whether this request was madness or courage in its purest form. When the laughter faded, the king finally spoke, asking a single question that echoed through the hall. What could a poor man's son possibly offer a princess? The father lowered his head, not in shame but in honesty, and answered that his son possessed nothing the court valued. No gold, no land, no title. He spoke instead of discipline learned through hardship, of respect earned through labor, and of a heart that refused to surrender to fear. His words were simple, unpolished, yet they carried a weight that silenced the room. For the first time that day, the king's expression changed, and curiosity replaced amusement. The king leaned forward and declared that love alone was never enough to rule beside a crown. If Arjun truly wished to stand next to Princess Eliza, he would first have to prove his worth, not as a lover, but as a man. The court fell silent as the king announced a series of trials, not designed to reward strength or wealth, but to expose character. Arjun would be required to serve the kingdom without recognition, to protect those who could offer nothing in return, and to choose integrity even when no one was watching. Only then, the king said, would the idea of a beggar's son becoming a prince be considered? When Arjun heard of the king's conditions, anger surged through him, followed by shame. At first, he believed the trials were meant to humiliate him, to remind him of his place in the world. But as the days turned into weeks, something within him began to change. Serving the poor, guarding travelers through dangerous roads, and laboring without praise stripped away his arrogance. He learned patience where he once demanded results, humility where pride had ruled his heart. Each challenge chipped away at the reckless boy, revealing a man shaped not by entitlement, but by effort and growth. Over time, whispers began to spread through the kingdom about the poor young man who worked harder than anyone yet, asked for nothing in return. Arjun no longer spoke of the princess as a prize to be won, but as a responsibility he might one day be worthy of. He listened more than he spoke, learned from those he once ignored, and discovered strength in restraint. Even the guards who had mocked his father now nodded in quiet respect. Without realizing it, Arjun was no longer trying to challenge the kingdom. He was slowly becoming a part of it. During one of his final duties, Arjun encountered Princess Eliza not as a distant dream, but as a human being. She watched him work among the people, noticing the humility in his actions and the calm strength in his silence. There were no dramatic words exchanged, only brief glances filled with understanding. For the first time, Arjun realized that loving her did not mean possessing her. It meant becoming someone who would never need to threaten or demand. That quiet realization changed him more than any royal trial ever could. When the day of judgment arrived, Arjun stood once more before the king. But this time his posture was calm and his eyes steady. The court sensed the difference immediately. He no longer carried the fire of desperation, only the quiet confidence of someone who had faced himself and survived. The king questioned him about loyalty, sacrifice, and love, and Arjun answered without rehearsed speeches or excuses. Each word reflected the lessons carved into him by hardship. The boy who once tried to force fate now waited patiently, ready to accept whatever decision the kingdom would make. The king rose from his throne and addressed the court, his voice firm yet thoughtful. He admitted that wealth and birth had once guided his judgment, but Arjun's journey had challenged those beliefs. Turning to the father standing quietly at the back of the hall, the king spoke of a man who had endured humiliation for the sake of his child, and a son who had learned that love must be earned, not forced. In that moment, the court understood that they were no longer witnessing a request for marriage, but the recognition of true character, something even a crown could not ignore. The king granted his blessing, not as a reward for obsession, but as recognition of growth. The marriage was announced without grand spectacle, marked instead by quiet respect and shared values. Arjun embraced his father, finally understanding the weight of the pain he had caused and the patience that had saved him from ruin. As he stepped into a new life beside Princess Eliza, he carried a truth far greater than any crown. Love that demands can destroy, but love that transforms can unite even the most divided worlds.